Covers Halftime Live, Thursday Night Football. Good to have everybody here with us, seeing a lot of familiar names in the chat already. It is the Pittsburgh Steelers 14, Cleveland Browns 13. Actually, a lot to talk about from a game that I think people were expecting to be a boring under, and we've sort of got anything but in the last quarter and a half. So we'll get to the lines in just a second, but good to say hello to the Wilk Man himself, longtime follower of the show, Eric, Steve, Charlie, Joseph, Chris, Brian, a lot of folks coming back for another halftime show. Good to have you with you. Would love to know your thoughts in the YouTube chat app right below the subscribe button. You can hit that too if you like, but let me know what you're watching in the first half, what you're thinking. We'll try to get some comments up here on the screen. Before we get to the lines, just want to talk a little bit about what we saw in the first half. And I will say this is a bit of a tricky and confusing one because we've seen a lot of differences from both of the teams that I wasn't expecting. And I don't know what we're going to see in the second half. So let's start with the Steelers. They've been two very different teams offensively in the first half. They were this two tight end, heavy personnel, run the football. Let's take the game slow to start for the first two drives. And then they're like, okay, that's not working. We're going to go tempo. We're going to get our third wide receiver on the field. By the way, Pickens is pretty good, pretty talented guy. So they get him on the field. And all of a sudden, this offense starts moving. You're seeing Trubisky getting out of the pocket, seeing him making throws on the run. He looks very comfortable. And that was pretty beneficial, led the Steelers to 2 touchdown drives. And going into the second half, it's a question of, do we see them revert back to what they have been for the first 2 weeks and the first 2 drives, which is heavy personnel running team that has a bad O-line and a running back with a Liz Frank injury behind it? Or do they stay this up-tempo team? Then the other surprise that I had is the Cleveland Browns and Joe Woods on defense. He's almost overthinking what he's doing. So last week against the Jets, it was an embarrassing loss. And there was a big defensive breakdown on the back end of that. They should have never had the Jets back on the field. But he was grilled all week by the press for how did that defensive breakdown happen? How did you let anyone behind you? And as was alluded to by Kirk in the broadcast sort of early second quarter, the Browns' issues and a lot of their breakdowns have come from zone coverage. Tonight, they've played man press coverage on both Pickens and Johnson, 2 very good dynamic downfield receivers, 70% plus for each guy with each of their corners. So it's been this defensive shift that they're still getting burned with it. And we're seeing Claypool and others run wide open in space downfield as the Steelers kind of make this offensive shift. So now we're thinking, well, are the Browns going to revert back in the second half? How is Joe Woods going to ultimately change this within the second half too? So there's a lot to think about. And another number on Trubisky I'll get to in just a second. But we're with producer Mick tonight, so let's pull up these second half lines and see what we're dealing with from FanDuel right now. So it is the Cleveland Browns -2.5 at -122, and then 19.5 for the total. So with the Steelers leading by a point, they get the ball first. The Browns now are adjusted 1.5 favorite, and that's shaded slightly higher. And there's other books within the market that I'd love to know within the YouTube chat. What are you seeing on that 2.5? Are you seeing more 2.5, or are you seeing 3? And then from the team totals, these are both going to be on the low side as we expand these menus to see what we're working with for the team totals. The Browns are at 10.5, and then the Steelers are at 8.5. Brian was saying he had Cleveland -3 in the first half. That's a tough one. But Vince in Vegas was saying 1.5 as well for the second half. So here's where I get to with this. As we see Eric only 2.5 at BOL and offshore. Where I'm seeing this as semi-intriguing was as I'm looking through the numbers as the first half is coming to a close, and I'm thinking about the game and sort of projecting what we were going to get for the spread, which is right on sort of where I expected it to open. The thing that really stood out to me within the numbers was the Steelers have kind of had everything go right the last couple drives on offense. Mitch Trubisky for the game has a completion percentage over expectation of plus 22.5%. Now, to put how extreme that number is into perspective, Josh Allen and Pat Mahomes for the season are around 4 or 5%, and they're among the best in the league. And so as I think about this second half, I'm thinking, is that in any way sustainable from Mitchell Trubisky as we go forward? And despite really, as good as we've seen him play a half outside of that Bills preseason game for the last 3 to 4 years of his career, the Steelers are out to a dominating 1-point lead. So as good as he's played, you're only getting the Steelers just barely ahead, and that Browns drive stalled out on 4th down coming down in the second half. And on the other side of the ball, we have Jacoby Brissett, who's coming off a career game last week against the Jets, but has looked very serviceable and very comfortable within his reads, making the throws downfield. He's sort of playing to the expectation and the rate that he has this entire season. And so you have a situation where I think the Steelers offense overperforming about to the highest extent that it could, and the Browns really doing what we've seen the Browns do all season and are doing it quite comfortably against the Steelers defense that, again, they don't have TJ Watt out there. So those linebackers getting stretched left and right quite a bit. Brissett's very comfortable throwing to tight ends. And Njoku's been targeted a ton. Amari Cooper's open in space. And then sort of the forgotten name, Peoples-Jones, the speedster, he's out there running as many routes as Cooper. Hasn't yet to get involved, but I'm seeing a very confident Jacoby Brissett and a very confident running game for the Browns that, as the Browns could potentially take a lead, is only going to become more so. So to me, I don't know if the Steelers are able to maintain that, because I would expect Joe Woods to be a little bit more of likely to make the adjustment in the second half than we see the Steelers maintain that. And so I'm going to go Cleveland Browns, minus 2.5. And I know we're seeing Canby books at 1.5. We're seeing FanDuel here specifically at 2.5. And I know it's up at 3, which to me, I think is still a good number. If you are seeing that 3. So I'll go with the 2.5 here. And obviously, if you are at one of the Canby books and seeing the 1.5, I think that would be a really good look as well. And Jay Swarbrick, which is a tough one to pronounce on the fly here, how much is that percent skewed by the Pickens catch? So the completion percentage over expectation, throw by throw, but then also Trubisky's sub 100 yards, 36 of that came on the Pickens catch, which had a completion probability sub 30%. So it was deemed as an improbable completion. So that certainly inflates those numbers too. But then this is a drop back by drop back stat that overviews that, which obviously skews that up very high too. And so to me, I still think the Browns are the team that makes that adjustment on the defense, because this man zone rate that they've had just is very unlike what they have done so far this season. And this was a really big switch. And I don't know how they stick with that, because it's not working. They've got to do something. And so I'll go Cleveland here minus 2.5. I think Brissett comes out, has a really good second half. The Browns find ways to get that run game a little bit more involved, especially if they take a lead. Very big Steelers drive coming out of the locker room that I think the Browns get to stop. And then it's Cleveland one way the rest of the way. So I will go Cleveland second half minus 2.5 as the bet. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. See you again on Sunday Night Football.